Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's it's afternoon where I live. My name is Troy Haugen. I'm the Director of Career and College Readiness at Lakes Country Service Cooperative. So we're one of the 9 service cooperatives in Minnesota. In some of your states, they're called service agencies. In Minnesota, they're called service cooperatives. My main responsibility here at Lakes Country is I administer the Federal Perkins Grant for 26 of our school districts. So CTE is the work that I do. We also do teacher preparation here, particularly for career and technical education through our alternative teacher preparation program. There's a variety of different things we also do here at Lakes Country, but our main responsibility is really to serve students, serve schools, and through that service to schools, impact students. There's a lot of things that I'd really like to think about and kind of process and talk about that really have implications from this study. One of the first things when we processed and talked about this study a variety of different times is that doesn't get captured or doesn't get talked about is the sheer amount of dollars that could be saved for our students, our concentrators, or any of our students that would enter the workforce perhaps a little bit earlier or enter the workforce without a huge debt load, student debt load. That I think is it's obviously not measurable by this study. However, that's an opportunity to be really thinking about as folks that are within the field, within a school system, within a administrative structure, or within a counseling structure about how are we making sure we're messaging to students in a way that, yes, granted, perhaps that $1,200 in Minnesota, that $1,200 to $2,400 increase for those CTE concentrators in the first 5 years of earnings doesn't seem like a lot, but juxtaposed over the course of time with the lack of debt load is massively important to understand and to contextualize and to think about. Oftentimes, I know where I live, so I'm in West Central Minnesota, halfway down the state from the north to the south, and my office is in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. And most of our students that enter a post-secondary program, a career and technical, or more of a trade type of career and technical program, if they do a post-secondary route, they will come out with 0 debt and with a job if they complete. They'll come out with 0 debt and a job, even if they don't complete, to be honest with you, and make a very, 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 very livable wage. That is incredibly important to think about that context in the bigger picture when we have students that are going into a 4-year path, which of course we need 4-year path. We need people to enter that 4 years. However, going to that 4-year path, exiting that four-year and not becoming a completer or not having persistence in it, the debt load that these students are bringing on is incredibly unsustainable for students and really for our overarching system. So I think that's just something to really consider as we really think about this in a bigger ecosystem. The other piece that if there's any friends from Minnesota on this webinar today, they've heard me talk about this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, is I could speak for Minnesota, but I think it's probably generalizable across the United States, is that career and technical education has a pretty big identity crisis. We talk about career and technical education like everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. But if I were to simply ask all 41 of you attendees or all 50 attendees that are on this group, including all the panelists, to give me a succinct definition of what career and technical is, I'd probably get 50 different definitions. And that's a little bit problematic. I have, as I said, I have 26 school districts across my consortia. And I have a lot of courses and a lot of programs that look and smell like CTE, but really are not career and technical. And I have a lot of courses that really aren't called career and technical, but because of licensure issues or other complex types of systematic things, are not categorized as CTE courses. We have to be thinking about really what is career and technical education. It's not just about those technical skills. It's that juxtaposition of academic and technical content. It's career development, career awareness. It is all of those things. It's getting that work experience in an academic and a technical perspective too, getting that placement in some way, shape, or form. It is not life skills. It's not quote unquote soft skills. That drives me nuts because it implies it's easy. It's employability skills. It is all of these things. It's leadership. It's tied to business and industry. It's tied to high skill, high wage, in demand careers. And we have to somehow find a better way to identify and strengthen our programming, because I sometimes wonder if we're, again, making a legacy program or thinking about things in a legacy perspective just because we've always done it that way. I pushed really hard on my consortium teachers to say, if it does not fit into a high skill, high wage, in demand industry sector, you can call it career and technical, and it might fit the definition, but it really isn't doing our students a full amount of justice if they're going into a pathway that leads that way. How are we really thinking about those in a bigger picture? Because it's our jobs as education isn't fully about fulfilling a workforce need, but we're not doing our due diligence if we're sending students into long-term exit into a workforce that isn't there for them. So I think that how are we defining CTE? How are we supporting career and technical in our schools and in our region? And can we do a better job about that? Do our school administrators understand what it is? Do our school administrators still call it vocational because vocational was right for the time that it was there, but it's not what it is now? Do we have the right infrastructure in place? Because I would argue that oftentimes we don't. And another huge thing that I keep continuing to think about and talking about is that and I ask teachers this all the time, are we preparing students for our future as adults, or are we preparing students for their future? Because we oftentimes say that we're preparing for their future, but we then revert to back whatever is more comfortable for us. The question I ask my business teachers is how many of my school districts are still teaching keyboarding, and as particularly as a part of a career and technical education program. And I know my colleague from the Department of Education and Business is on this Zoom with us today, and I'm hoping he's chuckling when I'm talking about this. And we have not very many. I don't think I have any that are in 9th or 12th anymore. But 5 years ago when I asked that question, there were still quite a few. And most of them are teaching it in the earlier grades, in the elementary, late elementary, early to mid to late elementary. And my next question is how many of your students in the elementary do you think will actually have a keyboard when they go into the workforce? And teachers are saying, well, everybody will. They'll still have a keyboard. And I think, I don't think so. I have 6-year-olds, twin 6-year-old boys that have yet to use a keyboard. and I don't accept in school for the applications and programs that are only education based. I think, are we, again, but, and they're being forced to do those, use that keyboard because that's the only path that our teachers thought they needed to do. So again, are we preparing kids for our future, or are we preparing kids for their future? And that's a really hard question to ask. And sometimes we have to just ask kids and make sure we're also including our workforce. That's the requirement for Perkins, is how are we integrating that work? And then I think high school, high wage, in demand. How are we connecting to high skill, high wage, in demand? And are these careers or are these jobs? I've gone away from using jobs. I still say it sometimes. I catch myself using the words jobs because our goal should be careers. How are we preparing students for long-term sustainable careers? That doesn't mean that they're going to have the same job their entire time, but how do we prepare students to enter a workforce that they can have a livable wage? They can have mobility for what they want to be able to do and live their life the way they want to. We keep hearing about this workforce that is just so incredibly tight, but I can also give you just as many stories of workforce, of employers that are not having problems becoming fully employed because they're being thoughtful about how they're hiring. And also, employees are moving to their places of employment because they see the connections between the two of them. So how can we see these bigger pictures? Frankly, work-based learning is that connection right now for students. I've about 40 candidates in our alternative teacher preparation program for the work-based learning endorsement in Minnesota. And a lot of them right now are teaching in special ed programs or in alternative learning center programs. They are stuck in a mental model sometimes of putting their students in entry-level positions constantly. And I say sometimes you might have to do that. However, there's also opportunities to learn about and think about for those students to move more towards, okay, if you're in an entry-level position, how does that entry-level position turn into a career? How does that current job turn into a career? So I think you've probably heard me talk long enough, but I just really honestly, there's so much to unpack in this study, and I appreciate the study a significant amount, and thank you all for the work, and thank you for listening to my rant a little bit, and keep up the good work, everybody.
Well, Troy, I wouldn't call it a rant. I think hearing the on-the-ground context is really meaningful, and so really glad to have you here with us. I'm going to invite Megan and Jeannie to come back on, and we'll have, I know we had a few questions come in. I'll start with those, but also welcome those of you who are attending. If other questions come up for you or you have a comment, please go ahead and share them. We'd love to engage with you. So we had a few questions related to students who are receiving special education or integrated services or IEPs. So there was one question about whether we could speak to data comparing Concentrator students with IEPs and those without. And then another question, for those who receive special education or integrated services, are data available regarding the nature of the services that students received in the context of CTE?
I can answer that. So for special education services, the simple answer is no, we don't have that level of data. So what data we have is just an indicator I think in both states. There's an indicator of whether the student receive special education or not. And we don't have like more detailed data on the kind of services or the services they receive as part of the CTE.
Megan, I might ask you the next question, which was a question of what did Indiana attribute the doubling in concentrator participation to? I don't know if you have any insights into that through conversations with our stakeholders, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a little bit. We were able to share these findings with our stakeholders in Indiana a little while back, and I think the big takeaway for them is that they've really been very intentional in recent years about giving increased attention to CTE, CTE pathways. During the course of study, it wasn't quite implemented yet, but they had done a lot of work to sort of redefine career pathways over this period of time, and think carefully about some of the issues that Troy is raising as well, about alignment of areas and meaningful types of CTE, and to really try to rebrand and make it an attractive pathway or set of pathways for students. So I think some of those things that are sort of coming to fruition now in terms of policy implementation were sort of in development and were starting to be reflected in sort of the culture in Indiana over that period of time.
Thanks, Megan. There's also a question about what policies or practices may contribute to more students in Minnesota becoming CTE concentrators, and maybe we can ask that to both Troy and to Dune, because you guys both might have reflections on the data or the lived experience as well.
Sure. So I would not really compare the percentages between Indiana and Minnesota. First of all, the definitions are so different, right? So in Indiana, we define a concentrator within a single pathway, which Indiana has somewhere around 60 to 70 pathways. Well, in Minnesota, we define more broadly, right? Within like each career field with 6-7 career field. So that's one thing. Another thing is the definition of Minnesota, it's 150 hours, while in Indiana, it's 6 semester credits, so they are not really comparable. So I would suggest not to comparing any like percentage directly between these two states.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe I can reinterpret the question, and maybe rather than more as comparing Minnesota, Indiana, I wonder if you might have some perspective on are there policies or practices that help more students find that concentration pathway, or kind of what do you see in terms of the programs that you support in terms of what policies or practices help students to find those kind of alignments?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think part of it is becoming. I think there's a dual answer to it. Well, there's probably more than a dual answer to it. So part of living in a very rural area, it becomes difficult for some of our programs to become, for some of our students to become concentrators. I serve 2 school districts I serve 1 school district that graduated 2 seniors last year. I think has 10 seniors this year. So literally can jump from 2 seniors to 10 seniors in 1 year. Still an incredibly small school district. And I have another school district in my consortia that graduates 300 students every year. But still, in the grand scheme of things, is a small, that's my smallest and my largest. It's very difficult for my school district of my tiny school district that graduates anywhere from 2 to 10 students to ever get a concentrator. And yet it's not difficult for my largest school district to get all kinds of concentrators just because of the opportunity for course offerings. That's also part of the reason why our definition of concentrator is very different in Minnesota. And why it's an hours based is because, I mean, if the joke is, policy joke is every state thinks that they're the most local controlled state. But I have school districts that are trimester schools. We have school districts that are semester schools. So to say count count a concentrator based on a semester doesn't work, because I have one school district right next to each other, might be a trimester and a semester, and you can't count them that way. So that's why we count them in hours. So it becomes more of a practical piece in some ways. And on the other hand, it becomes almost a responsibility of people like me that are consortia coordinators, perhaps, to push on districts and teachers to say, how are you creating in a broad-based program? How are we creating pathways to careers and not a smattering of courses that don't lead to a student becoming a concentrator? When I've seen school districts that will do these smatterings where the teacher will be teaching 6 courses, 6 preps, and will teach in 6 different pathways. And we'll never, a student will never be able to concentrate. Versus if we simply just narrow that focus a little bit, student can concentrate really quickly. So I think it's a combination of a couple of different things.
An interesting question, Troy, that I think builds on that, and we'll bring in our researchers too, which was about whether there was clustering among certain schools or communities in some of the outcomes. And so the individual is wondering about how the programs of study may be aligned to the CTE programs in post-secondary institutions and the labor market, and how that influences student outcomes. So would welcome your reflections on maybe were there opportunities for additional research and explorations in this area. But I think, Troy, I think you have some relationships in terms of how you think about labor market needs with your schools, so maybe can speak to that. So maybe I'll ask Megan and Jean May first to respond to that question about locale, and then Troy can jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this a little bit, and you may feel free to add as well. From a research standpoint, this is a large but very important undertaking. The alignment sort of between labor market and field of study requires data on labor market needs at a local level, which can be very difficult to get access to and kind of quantify. There's also a lot of local disaggregation of data, of the statewide data that needs to go into that to kind of match things up. So this is an area that's sort of been understudied so far, I think in part due to just the challenges with really gathering and digging into data at the level needed. But definitely something that is worth pursuing, and hopefully will continue to be a growing area in the field. So I wish we had more to say from the research standpoint, but I know Troy has a lot to contribute from the practitioner standpoint on this one.
Yeah, it's a really it's a conundrum. We have massive systems in place. We have a K-12 system in place. We have a higher education system in place, which are massive systems that are not easily movable. So in Minnesota, our consortia, our Perkins consortia model requires at least 1 school district and 1 post-secondary, 2-year post-secondary. Well, I have 26 school districts and 3 college campuses of a 2-year college. The 2-year college that I work with is really pretty nimble and responsive to labor market needs. But there's also this other component to all of this that becomes really complex, is that 2-year systems also have to be financially responsible and financially stable. Well, so does K-12, but there's a funding source behind K-12 called the state government that generally will put money into the system. State government in Minnesota typically is decreased its investment in post-secondary in Minnesota significantly over the last 20 years. And their only revenue source is typically, increasing tuition, which there's that pressure to not do that. So what happens oftentimes is there is a little bit of a disconnect between secondary programs and post-secondary programs, particularly in career and technical, because the really popular and necessary post-secondary technical programs have become more non-credit based programs and more pay for service types of programs, or they're short-term certificate types of programs, or even non-certificate programs. In Minnesota, they're I can't even think of what they're called right now. For some reason, it just went out of my head. Surprise, surprise. Customized training. I'm sorry. They're customized training programs. So, for example, the college campus that I work on doesn't have a welding program anymore, a 4-credit welding program, because there was not a demand for the 4-credit welding program, because credits aren't necessary in the workforce. The credentials are what's necessary in the workforce. The certifications what's necessary for the workforce. Credits increase that cost of the certification program. So if you circumvent the credit process and just go to the certification program, it becomes a customized training program. So, and customized training programs aren't bound by an academic year. You can do customized training programs at any given time, and so it becomes really a weird disconnect. Yes, the programs are there, but you can't align a secondary program to a customized training program, even though the customized training program is held at the post-secondary, but it's not a 4-credit, it's not a credit-bearing program. So, and that doesn't necessarily get to the question specifically, but it creates this really odd conundrum, because it appears as though that there's not a labor market connection, but there is between secondary and post-secondary. It's just the way to become a demand. We do have 2 areas that do have a pretty significant disconnect, and that's healthcare on the secondary side. We don't really have any healthcare programs, and that's our #1 labor market need. And we have all kinds of post-secondary programs. We have one tiny little secondary healthcare program, and out of our 26 districts, and then all of this plethora of post-secondary programs. And then we have a plethora of ag food natural resources programs, and really no true ag food natural resources programs that are post-secondary. But those, again, the AFNR type of program is really nuanced, because if you look at the NAICS data and the SOC data in labor market terms, they're not well defined, so it gets complex again. A AFNR student in a secondary program can be a welder, can be a transportation person that can go become a mechanic, and so can go to all of these, the career wheel. It doesn't have to go to the green area, but they can go to all of these other areas. So there's a philosophical kind of disconnect. It just gets to be really complex and weird, but it's really our ultimate goal again is how do we get students into a path that they can become successful in a career, and we just have to navigate the other stuff.
Thanks, Troy. Definitely lots of partners, lots of needs. I think that speaks to that very well. One final question. We had a question for Troy about where you might invest funds, like 2 to 3 areas to increase consideration of CTE participation before high school. So we've talked a lot about the pathways up, but wondering if you have any thoughts on where there might be some strategic investment or opportunities there.
Love that question. So I live in the policy world too, and when you live in the policy world, the first thing you're taught is what's the problem. You first have to ask what the problem is, and I would honestly say our problem is the identity crisis of all of this, and we have to first functionally invest in fixing that identity crisis around career and technical, and it's not amongst the students. It's amongst the adults. So to say even before high school, it's actually how do we provide high levels of professional development, whatever it is, to getting a better functional system of really truly understanding what career and technical is in the entire ecosystem of E12 education. whether it's a kindergarten teacher, whether it's a 12th grade math teacher, whether it's the counselor, whether it's the principal, the superintendent, whether it's it doesn't matter. And also a system of also getting legislators to understand this, getting the entire world to understand what this really is, because it's not vocational, it's not dirty, it's not anything. It's what makes the world go round. March of 2020, we quickly figured out what the necessary workforce was, and it was career and technical. But how quickly we've forgotten too. I think that really has to be, so if I had a magic wand and a money tree, that's probably where I would go first, because until we really get a better understanding, until I quit hearing, yeah, that's great for everybody else's kid, but not for mine. That's where we have to start.
Well, thank you, Troy, May, and Megan. Really appreciate you guys talking to us all about CTE and kind of reflecting together on two states, but a common theme and investment in this work. So thank you guys for joining us, and thank you to our attendees as well.